In the original Tony Hawk's Pro Skater, in the level Downtown Minneapolis, there's a good chance you'll be skating through the level like normal, when boom, you get taken out by an oncoming taxi. I love when this happens, and I love it in part because I hate it. But really, it's because this moment is a microcosm for everything that makes the Tony Hawk franchise special. First, let's look at it from a design perspective. The taxis are really just moving obstacles. In a game like Tony Hawk, having a big moving obstacle on a cycle can be highly irritating because of how much of the gameplay relies on trying to maintain continual, non-disrupted movement via lines. It can be difficult to set up a line when a taxi comes careening down the road and slams into you. But that's the point. The taxis are designed to be annoying, to be a serious hindrance to the player. Downtown Minneapolis is a later level in the game, so the presence of the taxis increases the difficulty and requires the player to not only balance on their board, but also balance in their mind how they navigate the level around them. The game actually expects some very minor complexity on the part of the player in order to skate the level well, which, at least for me, makes it one of the more difficult levels in the game. More importantly, the taxis help aid in making the game feel more immersive, at least by the standards of the time. But immersion is an interesting quality in the Tony Hawk franchise, because the games were, from the jump, constantly trying to strike a balance between realism and more arcade-like level design structure. The games want to create good lines for fun skateboarding gameplay. They want ramps, rails, jumps, gaps, inclines, etc. If you made the levels just a series of abstract areas that tie together various fun skating spots, then you could create an ideal gameplay experience, but it'd have no immersive quality. If, by contrast, you wanted it to be totally realistic, that wouldn't necessarily lend itself well to skating gameplay, and there wouldn't really be anything fun about it. So the design tries to strike a balance between the two extremes, to create a place that isn't technically a skate park and have it look like it's not a skate park, but have it play like one. This skate park in disguise design trend is present in most of the levels in the franchise, and Minneapolis is no exception. Construction work that happens to set up interesting ramps and quarter pipes, a fountain area that happens to feel just like skating a bowl. The point of the taxis is to make the downtown area feel like a downtown area. Big cities have traffic, but realistically, big cities have tons of traffic, which isn't conducive to good skateboarding. So shrink it down to 2 overly aggressive taxis and you have just enough for the player to feel like they're in a city, while giving players the freedom to skate on the street with minimal disruption of lines, while at the same time also creating an obstacle that players will have to be conscious of as they play. What makes the taxi so valuable from a design standpoint is that it conditions the player to think critically the way that a skater would. If you're skating past the street, you have to watch out for cars and actually time your skating around the possibility of oncoming traffic. It's all really simple design, but it helps the player feel like a skater. And that's the important part, because that's what Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is all about. It's not a game that simulates skateboarding. It's a game that is designed to make you feel like a skateboarder. It's emotional realism at the expense of material realism. And this gets me to the thematic dimension of the taxi in downtown Minneapolis. What is Tony Hawk's Pro Skater as a franchise about? What is the point of these games? Well, getting to feel like a skater is definitely part of it. But really, Tony Hawk's as a franchise is about the culture of skateboarding. I like to describe the Tony Hawk franchise as representing skating's self-concept. In other words, the way in which skaters view themselves and their culture is the viewpoint that players are being put into as they play the Tony Hawk games. Skateboarding has always had one foot in the mainstream and one foot in counterculture. In the mainstream, there were the competitions. They were more niche in the 80s, but in the 90s, skateboarding grew to become increasingly popular until it was a bona fide professional sport, being represented in the mainstream by competitions like the X Games. While this was what a lot of people saw of skateboarding and was a large part of what skating games prior to Tony Hawk would emphasize in the representation of the activity as a sport, these games often failed to recognize that skateboarding's other foot was planted firmly in the counterculture of the time. For a lot of people, skateboarding wasn't a sport, it was a lifestyle, and that lifestyle was marked by a few specific traits: a rejection of mainstream values and norms, an embrace of similar countercultural trends like graffiti and punk music, and most relevant, illegal skateboarding. A lot of skaters would find lines or spots in public or on private property illegally. They would trespass, they would break anti-skating laws, and they would sometimes go as far as vandalizing public and private property, both with their skateboards and off them. This countercultural element meant that for street skaters, skateboarding was not just a rejection of the mainstream, but it was also a feeling of freedom from it. By taking public locations in which skating was banned and converting it into your own little skate park, skaters would brush up against the law, against businesses, and against the general mainstream culture, but would also find community with each other and creative expression and freedom through it. This idea that skating represented a unique freedom from the constraints of mainstream culture appealed heavily to the poor and to youth, who were already positioned to be outside of the mainstream regardless, and found sport, artistry, expression, and even therapy in being able to skate, often in places they weren't supposed to. This is what Tony Hawk's Pro Skater attempted to capture differently from its predecessors. You can even see it in the level progression. The first level, the warehouse, is ambiguous as to the legality of what the player is doing. Is this trespassing an abandoned warehouse, or is this a warehouse that hosts a fully legal skate park? It's not until level 2 that the illegal side of what the player is doing becomes more apparent. The school level takes place, well, at a school, after hours and most likely illegally. Schools are often seen as good skate spots for a number of reasons. The fact that they close earlier than most places, the fact that they have wide open areas and plenty of potential spots, and the fact that a lot of kids who skate probably attend the schools and can use after hours or over summer skating as a form of youthful rebellion. This trend progresses into several other levels. The mall run is clearly breaking the law, for example, and Roswell is straight up breaking into a military base. Sort of the ultimate culmination of skaters going where they're not supposed to the point of narrative absurdity. But downtown Minneapolis is special. See, most of the other levels show these skate spots from the skater's point of view, never really clarifying what the outside world thinks about what the player is doing. Minneapolis, on the other hand, is the first level with an actual NPC that populates the game's space. In this case, it's 2 taxis that roam around the map endlessly. They never stop, they never change direction, they just circle the same path forever. These taxis are ruthless and will not stop for the player ever. Instead, they shout at the player whenever they do hit you. They're coded to be overly aggressive, and while this could just be a technical limitation or the developers just not thinking to implement more realistic traffic, I love that they left it the way it is. Because ultimately, the taxis are a stand-in for mainstream society in the game. If the game is meant to represent the culture of skateboarding, this is the first level that represents what the mainstream culture outside of skateboarding thinks of it. The taxis clearly view you as a subhuman nuisance. They're on their track to wherever they need to go, which is apparently just around in circles forever, and if you're in the way, they're not stopping. This flagrant disregard for the humanity of skateboarders is a good example of skating culture's self-concept. To a skater, a taxi is just an obstacle, just a big hunk of metal that will ram you if you're in the wrong spot at the wrong time. And in the mindset of the skater, a person driving a car simply views you as an obstacle to where they need to go. It is almost satirical. It's an absurd image, one in which taxi drivers are relentless psychos, hell-bent on getting to where they need to go even if they mow skaters down like grass to get there. One in which skaters and mainstream society are not just at odds, but have a fundamentally adversarial relationship. This absurdity is part of what made the Tony Hawk franchise so engaging. It had the spirit of youthful rebellion true to the culture, while also feeling very gamey. It carries over into other aspects of the game's design. The goals for the first game also include vandalism, most notably destroying no skating signs, a goal that appears again in the downtown Minneapolis level. These signs do such a good job of communicating the emotional realism of the game. The idea that the only signs up in a town are all signs that say no skating, and that your goal as a skater is to destroy these signs by skating, is a perfect snapshot of what the Tony Hawk franchise is supposed to be about. It's about feeling like a skateboarder. It's about feeling like you're against the grain of the non-skating world by transforming it into a skating world. The original game has a charming simplicity to it. The goals are all fairly basic, with only one unique goal per level. The levels are all straightforward and serve as general archetypes for interesting skate spots. A lot of the features that would define the series had not yet been added to the game the first time around, like manuals, reverts, and most importantly, the Create a Skater feature. As a result, looking back at the first game, you can see almost a distilled sense of what skateboarding is about from the perspective of the developers. Whereas later titles would lean into the professional and sports elements of skateboarding more, the original Tony Hawk's Pro Skater is really, first and foremost, about the simple joy of skateboarding. That makes it one of the more interesting games in the franchise to come back to, narratively speaking. Because really, the narrative is the levels themselves. The narrative is getting hit by a taxi that refuses to stop for skaters. The simplicity of it is really refreshing in retrospect because it does a better job making you feel like a skater, like someone who makes the world their skate park. Contrast this with the later games, which increasingly leaned into storytelling focused on awkward comedy. It's as if the series went from representing the worldview of the subjects of the game, namely skaters, to representing the worldview of the target audience for the games, teenage boys who play a lot of video games. It makes me appreciate how straightforward the original game really is. The gameplay is more simple, which makes it feel more like actual skateboarding. And the world building and storytelling is only barely existent, allowing the game to really capture that feeling of being a playground for skateboarders to explore and discover. If anything, the taxis are, ironically, an example of the value of subtle storytelling and world building, because all you really need is to make the player feel like they're part of the world that the game is trying to create. For better and for worse, getting ran over by an unhinged maniac when you're trying to hit a sick line makes you feel for a moment like you really are a skater. Thanks for watching. If you're new to the channel and like this video, check out my A Brief Moment of Meaning series where I look at small moments in games that communicate bigger themes. I have videos up on Mario Sunshine, Luigi's Mansion, Mario 64, and Dark Souls, and plan to make more videos in this series in the future. Definitely also subscribe if you like this kind of video so that you can see new videos as they drop. If this video has you clamoring for more insight into the Tony Hawk franchise, this video serves as somewhat of a teaser for a long-form video that I hope to make covering the franchise in depth, looking at how the self-concept of skateboarding as viewed through the Tony Hawk games evolved over time parallel to the evolution of skateboarding itself into a mainstream phenomenon, something that was heavily influenced by the games themselves. If you're interested in seeing a video talk about how the values of the Tony Hawk franchise changed to reflect mainstream values that the series initially stood against, comment so that I know to make the long-form video sooner. Lastly, this video would not be possible without the support of my patrons over on Patreon. Patrons get access to parts of long-form video essays early, get their name in the credits of each video, and have the satisfaction of knowing they helped me stay afloat to keep making the best videos that I can. It's only $1 to join, and either way, stay tuned for more videos, and everyone, have a great day.